Alrighty, and welcome to the very first episode of Character Builds with me, Mr. Acid. And this series is going to be, as the name implies, building characters. But unlike the majority of D&D, which is what I'm going to be focusing on in terms of game mechanics, but you can take these characters and apply and the methods I use that I'm going to be talking about and apply them to any RPG you want, or even game design if you so desire. But unlike the majority of character build videos, particularly for Dungeons and Dragons, which tend to focus on only game mechanics, I'm actually going to be going through an entire character build with you, including how I arrived at the decisions to make the character that I did, whether that be using random generators, little bits of inspiration, or quite often simply asking myself questions and then trying to figure out answers. So I'm going to go through the entire process so you can not only at the end have a character that you can take and use if you so wish, of course, make it your own, but you can also learn a process that you can use yourself in order to create characters. So, age 27, I did not intend to leave that up there, but oh well, it's there. Let's just roll with it. So, who is at an age of 27? The answer is Martius Fastoff, which is a randomly generated name. I kind of like the sound of it. And who is Martius? This is Martius. And what is Martius? Well, the title of the video will give you an idea. He is the Outcast. So, how did I start building up this character? So I have a whole big list of character archetypes and various little ideas for characters, just little short, like I said, character archetypes like the Outcast or the comic relief, that sort of thing, traditional character archetypes, as well as some of my own things that I threw in there. And I just add little notes to the list whenever I have a bit of inspiration, and then when I think I have something that I can run with, I go ahead and start fleshing it out, and the result is going to be these videos. So, how did I come up with the Outcast, Martius Fastoff? So the spark of inspiration for this one was just I was watching, I believe it was like a ghost hunting thing on YouTube. They can be fun to watch sometimes. Believe it or don't believe it, doesn't really matter. They can be fun to watch. And they were at an old sanatorium where they treated TB patients, tuberculosis or consumption as it was known then. And the idea hit me, something based off of an illness. And I was looking through the list because I happened to be messing around with that while I, had the show thing, the Paranormal Files, I think is what it's called, on another screen playing, and the Outcast jumped out at me, and I had the idea, someone who has been outcast because of an illness. So I wrote that down, and then I started thinking, asking those questions I mentioned. Why would they be outcast because of an illness? Well, the obvious one is that other people don't want to get sick, so they've been outcast from where they're from, and they have to go get a cure. I thought that was a little too straightforward, a little too obvious. So, again, going back to the whole TB thing, and generally places where people are put when they have an illness that is a quarantine situation, which very recent events, we most of us understand this concept. I had the idea, okay, he doesn't have the illness anymore. He survived the illness. But a lot of other people did not. And that is why he's an outcast. Okay, so that was my jumping off point. So then I started working on a basic bio for the character. And I built it up in bits and pieces. I have a little checklist that I will probably put up to be downloaded. I just have it as a simple WordPad file right now. And it's just things, like name, age, what class or classes, a little thing about, appearance, alignment, and how it manifests. I'll go through the whole thing. That's what the video is going to be about. But let's just kick things off with a few basics. So we already have his age. He's 27. I accidentally left that visible, but that's alright. So let's go ahead and bring this up. So he's age 27. We know his name and the class that I have chosen, because honestly it could have been any class, is the Aberrant Mind Sorcerer. And so this is what our spread is going to end up being by the time we are done with the build. Is a 19 level sorcerer, aberrant mind, and fighter 1, and I will explain that later. And his alignment, I went with neutral good. Why neutral good? And why do I bother with alignments? Well, I think alignments are a good guideline, a good, a guidepost, benchmark, whatever you want to call it, for, in general, how a character would behave. What it shouldn't be treated as is a line in the sand that shall never be crossed, a rigid, stringent, I'm mixing up words here, rigid set of rules that must be obeyed. It's a guideline. So, as I said, alignment, how it manifests, is one of my checklist things here. It's really like a fill in the blanks set of things that I feel are really good for giving you a meaty character that gives you what you need, gives the Dungeon Master what they need without being like a 20-page document, which some people will love, other people will ignore. It depends on your table. If you're a long-time player and maybe you just have trouble coming up with your own characters, you need inspiration from, or whatever the case may be, which of course is fine. Some people love coming up with characters. Some people love playing the game, and coming up with a character is a less important part to them. Everybody plays their own way. That's what this is all about. And again, helping you with the process, and maybe just for the fun of it. So, neutral good, and how that manifests for him. I think he's the type of character, and of course you can change any of this stuff. I mean, obviously you can, but like I said from the very start, make it your own. But this is how I created the character and the way I kind of see him in my head. So, he tends towards doing the right thing. He likes to be helpful. Tries to be helpful. And he's generally, kind of a good person. But, for reasons we will get into, he doesn't have much respect for authority figures, the law, anymore. I think he probably would have started off as lawful good or lawful neutral. But now he's kind of shifted to neutral good, and his general alignment. And the reason for that, and again, this was just stuff that I thought of as I was coming up with little bits about the backstory. That's often how it is. You come up with one thing and it's like, oh, that makes me think of this other thing, and then you roll with that for a bit. Or, it's like, well, what makes this work? What makes this make sense? Or how does this fit into the backstory? Those sorts of questions, and you answer those questions, and that's how you get new jumping off points for your creation. So in this case, I thought, okay, he comes from a city. I wrote down city and town within this. I'm thinking this is probably, and of course, the dungeon master, you have to work with your dungeon master for this sort of stuff. This is world building. And a lot of dungeon masters love when you do their job for them. Even just a little bit. It helps them, and it makes you feel included in the process as well, so everybody benefits. But I'm thinking this is like a city-state, or a powerful city within a kingdom or something along those lines, and the primary powers that be are high elves. And Martius is a wood elf. So, when the wood elf community was being ravaged by this illness, the powers that be, these high elves in power, at least majority high elves, and the other powers that be of the city, didn't really do anything to help. In fact, they actively made it worse, and we'll get into that a bit later. But because of that, while in the past he may have been perfectly fine, law-abiding, stay within the rules sort of guy, he's kind of lost his respect for authority and the law. So I think neutral good, that's why I went with that alignment. It fit the best. And once again, guideline, not something that has to be strictly obeyed. Alrighty. So what is the next thing that we can kind of get in here? Don't need to put every last little bit on this. I'm just trying to put little tidbits that might be useful to note down. Religious affiliation. This is another backstory element. None. Why? Well, along with the powers that be not doing anything to help and making things worse, the clergy, the clerics, they didn't do anything to help either. Maybe it was because they couldn't. But if they could, they didn't. And again, that's up to the DM to decide exactly why they did it, whether it was deliberate or simply they didn't have the ability to help. But they didn't help. And again, even though it was a traveling cleric of some ability that eventually was able to kind of cleanse this area and get rid of this illness eventually, I think it would have soured him to dealing with religious figures. Now, as a player, it's up to you to decide if he, in private, still pays homage to a specific god or group of gods. You need to talk to your DM, as always, to understand how that's going to play a part in the campaign, if at all. But as far as, like, actively participating in any kind of religion, I don't think he would. So let's get into some of the backstory, the meat of the backstory. He survived. In fact, he is the only one that survived this illness. dozens, maybe hundreds died. I think I put a figure somewhere in my little notes about like 90 some people died. Could easily have been far more than that. It doesn't really matter as long as it was enough people that it made an impact. This was not a small event. It may have been a localized event and a few dozen or maybe 150 or so people died. It wasn't an entire city. I'm not saying that any amount is acceptable. I'm just saying that in the greater scheme of things, it wasn't necessarily a huge number of people that died, but it was for the group, the community that this happened to, it was a substantial number of their community because it was the Wood Elf community that was primarily impacted. So he survived. His fiance, his entire family, most of her family, a lot of friends and acquaintances died. But he lived. He was the only one that lived. Why? Because he became a sorcerer. He wasn't a sorcerer, or at least he didn't know that he was until this happened. It was being on the verge of death, a hair's breadth away from death, that awoken this magical ability within him, and that's how he survived. You don't have to be specific necessarily. The Dungeon Master might come up with a reason. But just this spark of magic is what kept him going just long enough to be healed. Again, he is the only survivor of this outbreak, of this illness. And eventually, that's what led him to leave home. Because of the guilt of being the only survivor and feeling that everybody else secretly hated him for living when everybody else died. And of course, suddenly having this magical ability, possibly some prejudice there, or not, again, that's really up to the Dungeon Master. Probably didn't help, though. As for the powers that be, these high elves and possibly some others, but primarily high elves that run this city, they set up a quarantine during the outbreak, and during the height of it, right up until the end, really, anybody in the area that became ill was just kind of tossed in. Even if the symptoms weren't even related. And I can easily imagine, because this sort of thing has happened all through history, just look at like the McCarthy era and, any number, the Inquisitions in Europe and any number of other things, online, lynch mobbing, aka cancel culture for today. It happens, it has always happened and continues to happen that all someone has to do is make an accusation under the right circumstances, in the right atmosphere, and anybody can be targeted based on bubkus, bullshit, nothing. So it's easy to imagine that once this quarantine was set up and people anybody who had a damn allergy attack, or were even people lying about it, could be tossed in this quarantine area, and where they definitely would get sick and die. So I could easily see that sort of thing happening. Again, that's really up to the DM to decide, but it's something that very easily could have happened in a scenario like this that we're weaving, which will kind of a pun for later. And Yeah, I have here a cleric finally showed up who could and would do something about it. Over 90 people were dead, and he was barely alive. So again, the precise number isn't super important. It's more just the fact that this was such a huge impact on this wood elf community of this city. So, what was his prior occupation? Now, I'm not sure that if there's any kind of a tailoring or tailor based profession, so I just went with weaver's tools, and he also does tailoring. That was his occupation. Why? Sounded reasonable, because it plays into what I felt like was a core element of this character, which I will get to. So let's go back to some of this other stuff in my checklist just so I don't miss anything. So let's just go over some simple stuff. Appearance. I wanted to do something than the typical wood elf. I thought, high elves are usually portrayed as kind of Asian in their features. Like, I can't remember his name. The guy who plays and voices Shang Tsung for Mortal Kombat. That kind of Japanese, some parts of China and other areas of uh, what would originally it was called the Orient. Don't forget India is part of Asia too, so just saying Asian doesn't really mean anything. But, very sharp, angular features, almond shaped eyes, that's kind of elf to most people, that sort of look. And with skin colors of various shades, ranging from, again, kind of Asiatic, darker skin tones, very, very pale. High elves tend to be depicted as being very pale, very, red and blonde hair sort of look. And wood elves tend to be darker skin, darker hair. So I thought maybe like a Central or South American look. So I thought appearance, he's an attractive younger man of what, you know, we would consider to be kind of a Central South American look, that kind of Native American mixed with the Spanish blood sort of a look. And I thought high elves in this case, still kind of the pointy ears and angular features, but more French and Spanish. They were the primary conquerors of a lot of the Americas. So, and of course, the Dungeon Master doesn't have to go that deep into it. This is just ideas I had for kind of constructing this whole character. So just, yeah, an attractive younger man, 27-ish, of what we would call, a Central or South American appearance, is what I went with. Think, who's a good example? I can't think anybody right offhand. I don't know, a young Ricardo Montalban, perhaps. Kind of fits the picture there a little bit. Vocal characteristics, mannerisms, and again, I'm just going through my list here. I don't want to skip over anything accidentally. Um, Player, that sort of thing should always be up to the player. However, when I'm going through my little bios here, if I have any ideas, I will share those, but you don't have to use them. If you're going to play this character for a one shot or even for a campaign or something, Make it your own, especially the voice. You're the one that's going to be playing it a lot longer than I am, since I'm just kind of I like creating characters, so that's what I'm doing with this. So I kind of see him as being kind of soft spoken, a polite, charming. That's just kind of some vocal characteristics and mannerisms that I thought would fit. But really, all that stuff is up to you. That those are just some things that I felt fit. Family, he probably has some relatives still, but all of his immediate family died in the outbreak. And I did come up with a name for it using random generators. Took me a while because there aren't very many good ones for names of illnesses. But stinging fever was what I came up with. So let's go ahead and put that down. Why? I just think that is such an evocative name for an illness. It's very kind of old school, but it really sounds like something that would be nasty. Stinging fever. And let's just go ahead and say, so the outbreak of stinging fever killed his family and many of his friends. That's a little notation there, and let me make sure that is this all showing up? Not really. So let me go ahead and drop that down so it's all visible still. Good, good, good. So we've got his prior occupation already, and I went over the kind of general backstory. Where he's from, how he feels, kind of already went into that. Gonna have a lot of mixed feelings, a lot of negative feelings, some good still, good memories. I mean, after all, I envision that all of this stuff probably went down a year to 2 years before he would be getting involved in what would be this a one shot or a campaign, or possibly a lot longer. Because if you're doing a one shot, it might be a higher level character, and then you'd have to figure out a bit more to do with the backstory. But that's very situational. But overall, yeah, probably a lot of negative feelings towards uh, his old town, his city that he came from. He feels like the remainder of the people, his old friends that survived, the community in general, shunned him, ostracized him for being this only survivor. And of course, he has a lot of disdain, possibly even hatred for high elves, because those are the people that he really blames for the whole thing being as bad as it was. But he lived there his entire life. On the other hand, it no longer feels like a home, so a lot of very mixed feelings, I think. How much that would come into play, entirely up to you. Went into religious affiliation, any interests and hobbies. Um, I think playing into his profession, he's the kind of guy that that's what he knows, and he actually is interested in it. So he's interested in all aspects of the weaving arts, tapestry, carpets, that sort of thing. He enjoys examples of fine needlework, anything to do with cloth or tailoring, fine clothing, anything to, again, weaving, tapestry, anything like that would be something that he would be interested in. And I kind of think he's probably become a bit of a drinker. It's not really a hobby, but and I mentioned it comes up again later in my list here. A secret. It's usually good to have some kind of a secret, or two or three, for a character, something that they're kind of holding close. It doesn't necessarily have to be anything super uh, bad or drastic. It doesn't have to be anything bad at all. But what's his secret? He stole some shit. OMG. Who did he steal it from? Those fucking high elves. So yeah, on his way out of town, an opportunity presented itself, and he stole some stuff from some of those high elves that run the city. Now, again, this is the sort of thing that you're going to have to work with your DM on to determine what was stolen, how much value it has. Does he still have that stuff? Has he sold it? Does he have extra money because of this? Does he have some interesting item or items because of it? Or has he already blown through the money? It comes up again later. Personally, I think that if he does, if unless he's had to get rid of it because you want to advance the timeline for him a bit, he probably would still have it. The flip side of this, of course, is that since he stole stuff, they are probably going to be trying to get it back and or find him. Perhaps he stole information instead of things. Again, that's something you need to work out with your dungeon master. So, behavior towards strangers. I think he's been on his own and traveling for a while. I put down several months, could be anywhere up to a couple of years at this point. That's really up to you and how you want to start this character and where in a campaign you're going to start. If you're starting at level 1, a few months is fine. If you're starting at like level 3, which is very common, probably a year. Level 5, which is also very common because a lot of people don't like playing the lower levels. You probably would want a couple of years. He's had some miles under his belt at that point. Exactly what happens in that time frame, that is going to be up to you because I can't give you everything. I can give suggestions off the top of my head, which would kind of be that really I think he's just been wandering around. I mean, I've actually got that in my notes. It's not really off the top of my head. Before the campaign is going to start, I don't think he's really done a lot. At least nothing that would jump out at someone. I think he's been wandering around, he's been on his own, and all the stuff that he's gone through, going back to the original point of how he responds to strangers, he's become a much more guarded person. I think he used to be a much more open person, but he can still put the charm on. He can still be friendly, but it takes a lot more effort than it used to. It used to be a natural thing that just he could do. It was so natural for him. But now he's become a lot more guarded and, like, again, interacting with people has become more difficult. And really to try to buddy up to people, at least to start with, and try to be friendly and charming, that takes a lot more effort when it used to be effortless. And similarly, in my list here is how he behaves towards friends and people he trusts. And again, this is a case where it really is up to you. This is a guy who has been through a very traumatic experience, and then he suffered through at least what he thinks was social exclusion. More on that in a bit. After the traumatic experience of the illness itself and recovering from that. He then dealt with the social uh, impact. So I think how he opens up with people, including the other players, is up to you. He might go back to being a very open, gregarious person once he feels safe around others. But it might take time also. It really depends on how you want to play him and what feels right with you. That's something I can't tell you when it comes to how, I can never tell you really how to play the character. I can only give suggestions and, you know, add little tidbits that I think are appropriate, things that would make sense. So, let's say, or get to a fear. So, fear or a couple of fears. Again, I think it's good for a character to have something that they're worried about. I mean, these don't have to be phobias, although that could also be a very interesting character trait as long as you don't take it too far. But I think the primary things that he would be worried about right now would be repercussions for what he's, pardon me, for what he stole, and I think he would have an ongoing fear of illness. Very understandable. Most people who have gone through a significant illness are afraid of getting sick again. And of course, if you want to add anything to it, go ahead. If you're going to go ahead and play this character, then at that point it becomes your character. This is just something that you can take and play with and make it your own. Personality traits or quirks. In addition to being less outgoing and guarded, be more guarded, I think he's probably gotten to be kind of paranoid, especially with illnesses and probably anything to do with high elves. He would be rather paranoid about. Possibly kind of paranoid about people in general. Um, but that also I have that down in bouts of depression would make sense. But in both of those cases, be careful. My little note is that that can make a game a lot less fun, so take caution, know your table, read the room, and if you're bumming people out, dragging things down, adjust. A good example is that if you're familiar with Critical Role, Liam can be an ass at times. His emo shit can get real old. I know some people love it. For me, at least, it gets old sometimes. I think one of my favorite moments in Campaign 2 was they were the first time they were talking to like the queen of the drow, whatever she was supposed to be. I can't remember the specifics, and he was going off on some goddamn soliloquy, and she just shut his ass down hard. He's a little too fond of his Shakespearean shit. And I don't mean that in a disparaging way towards Shakespeare and those who love him. It's just that he gets a little annoying at times. Anyway, tangent over. But I would still say, to go back to the actual point is just be careful. And anything antisocial, anything that has to do with mental illness, sometimes it can be fun. And, if it's funny and that is appropriate for the table, if you're going for, if you're at a table that loves the drama, then, then go for the drama. If your table prefers lighthearted comedy and adventure, which, from what I've seen, most D&D tables tend to at least gravitate towards fun and funny, because you are playing a game after all. Just again, read the room. So, where did he learn his skills? Well, I think he served as an apprentice to someone, obviously. I thought his mother and father. Makes sense, a family business. They were also weaving and tailoring, possibly dyeing cloth, that sort of thing. So I think he would have grown up not necessarily wealthy, but comfortable, and he would have learned from his parents and, his siblings. Now, if you want to actually come up with that family, I have not. If you want to, that's perfectly fine. And you should actually, so if they come up in the course of gameplay, you'd be able to reference whatever family he had. I just didn't go into it because at this point, it's not a major plot point because they're dead. And this is not a case where I would think that the DM should say, "Oh, someone survived." A major part of this character's backstory is that he saw his family die, and it was not fast. At least in terms of, like being cut down and maybe somebody survived. No, he saw them die of a lingering malaria type illness that would have killed within a few days or possibly even a couple of weeks, 3 weeks or so. It would have taken time. And he saw it happen to his entire family and basically everyone he cared about, aside from maybe a few friends that survived because they never got sick. But yes, you definitely, if you're going to play a campaign in particular, you definitely should go ahead and at least come up with mother and father and any siblings you think you might have had, because it might come up in conversation. Possibly some friends as well that might have died. So, what's next here is cosmetics. I think, not every table is going to be the same and not everybody likes to do it, but I think adding some flavor to your spellcasting, your fighting style, anything to spice things up, make it a little more personal to your character and for yourself, it makes characters a lot more real. Other than just, everybody casts the exact same fireball all the time. Everybody has exactly the same magic missile. That's boring and impersonal. So, let's consider some spell cosmetics. Cloth, threads, needles, etc. That's the sort of stuff that I came up with. What I've written down here, his skills as a weaver and tailor have influenced his spell work. Give his spells elements of threads, weaving, cloth, needles, and needlework, ribbons, buttons, etc. He might have a magic missile spell that looks like threads with needles at the end. And they shoot out and look like they're weaving around together and then strike. That sort of thing. That sort of flavor. Alright. Any false beliefs about themselves, or himself in this case. People often do have things that they believe about themselves that aren't really true. Not always, but it's often the case. So in this case, I don't know if you'd really consider it a belief about himself. It's not really a belief, but I do think he would have a tremendous amount of survivor's guilt. I think in modern terms, he would probably have PTSD. And I think leaving home would have been as much about getting away from what happened as the behavior of the people, even though that's what he blamed it on. was that he felt like he could no longer live there and work in a community that was going to shun him, ostracize him. But I think he's kind of would be avoiding the real issue, which is he just couldn't stand to be around where all of that happened anymore. Oh, I'm running out of space here. There you go. Now you can see all of that stuff. Sorry about that. I've got a bunch of stuff I'm juggling here on one screen while I have my background pictures and things, which is just there for something pretty to look at for you on the other screen. But probably, if there's anything else I feel like I need to put down, I can go ahead and delete that stuff and move on. I think we're kind of getting into the end game here as far as the character part of the build, which of course the entire series, it's supposed to be the majority of it is about the character. And then we'll do the build, the mechanics at the end. Because for this set of videos, because I'm going to be doing some others that start with the mechanics and the class and the mechanics and then build a character off of that. This, I wanted to build the character and then add the mechanics to fit. Even if it isn't 100% optimized, that's not the important part. Although none of the characters I'm going to be creating mechanics-wise are going to be super weak, you're going to be able to play them all the way to level 20 if you want to. It's just I'm not going to be nickel and dime optimizing everything. But anyway, back to any of these mental issues. Again, I'm kind of blanking on where I was. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Damn. Yes, getting away from the memories as much as the people. And I think it's also very possible that he has some issues of being delusional to a degree, paranoid about these feelings of persecution. It may have been a case where maybe some people had issues with him, were actually shunning him, looking at him funny or whatever because of what happened. It's also entirely possible that he was unintentionally driving people away, that he was giving off the vibe of someone who did not want to be spoken to anymore. He wanted to be left alone, even though he didn't realize he was doing this sort of stuff. And that's actually why a lot of these people didn't interact with him like they used to, and he perceived that as being ostracized, being shunned. And again, well, I have a caution note about this sort of stuff in this next section. So, any false beliefs, biases about other people. Obviously, he doesn't like high elves very much. And just how bad that is how strong it is up to you. It's up to you how to actually play the character. So that it could range from just not trusting, being distrustful towards high elves, to straight up racism and just hating high elves. And I don't think he'd be unlikely to be murderous in that regard. I don't think he would go that far necessarily, unless he was in a situation where he felt like he, perhaps, your DM could possibly plan a plot hook that one or more of the high elves that ran the city intentionally were killing off the wood elves. That might cause him to go that far. But in general, I don't think he would be murderous. But I think when it comes to high elves, he'd be a lot more likely to engage in various kinds of antisocial behavior, even criminal behavior, and justify it where high elves are concerned. And going back to the possibility of paranoia and delusions, he might be suffering from paranoid delusions of persecution. Thinking that people are seeing something in him, perhaps, judging him when they really aren't. You know, a smile becomes a sneer of derision. A curious bystander's look becomes a stare of condemnation. That sort of stuff. And the cautionary note I have here is that that sort of antisocial behavior can interfere with everyone else having fun if taken too far or done too often. So be careful. Going back to the whole being way too emo and irritating everybody, doing this sort of thing can spice up a character, but if you push it too far, you do it too often, you do it, again, read the room. If people are trying to have fun and you're getting a little too much into the crazy stuff, you might be killing everybody else's mood. Be mindful. And of course, if they're not being respectful of what you're wanting to do, maybe you're at the wrong table. Or you're playing the wrong character for that particular group. Which is why everybody should have a discussion beforehand and make sure everybody's on the same page as far as expectations. So, I think the last super important thing here, we're going to get into the last handful of things, but the last one that's really important is why adventure in the first place? You need a reason. Some kind of motivation. Something's got to get his ass out the door. Well, we already know what got him out the door. Why would he go adventuring? And there's always the possibility for a character to not intend to go adventuring, and I think this is the kind of character that's like that. I think, he's been wandering around a long time, probably kind of aimlessly. I think he's probably, again, if he still has any of the stuff he stole or money from selling it, he's probably got that in reserve, and he's probably been relying on his skills, possibly trying to learn how to use his magic and use that as a way to make money as well. Odd jobs, he comes across a farmhouse and does mending of clothing and helps around the farm for a meal and a place to stay for the night. He gets to a town and takes a few odd jobs to earn some coin to stay at the inn and have a meal and drink. That sort of thing. And I think that he's the type of character, and again, you need to talk to your DM and make sure that this character's way of getting into the adventure would make sense with what the DM plans to do. Obviously, the DM does not want to tell you straight up how they're going to start the adventure, unless they do want to do something simple like group of people respond to an ad at the signpost, adventurers wanted, that sort of thing, or a meeting at the pub. All of that is fine. There's nothing wrong whatsoever with a simple start to a campaign like that, but I don't think this is the type of character that fits that sort of start. So you do need to make sure of that before you commit to this particular motivation and why would he go adventuring, because if you want to play this character but the start of the campaign doesn't make sense for what I'm talking about, then you need to adjust it so it does make sense. Maybe all the wandering has given him a little bit of adventure lust or something. Anything is possible. It's just that I see him as the kind of character, as is, that would fall into an adventure or be swept up in an adventure. I don't think he would go seeking it out. All right, start wrapping this up. Ideologies and personal beliefs. I really prefer to leave that up to you. This is a character that kind of the entire point is that he was a regular guy. He was a 9 to 5, work hard, have a family, try to be a good guy sort of guy. And then everybody started dying. Everybody got sick, everybody started dying. And his his whole life was shattered. His worldview, his view of people, his view of authorities, everything has been rocked as hard as it possibly could have been. So, whatever ideologies, whatever personal beliefs he had, and what ones he might still have, and what ones he might develop, I think that really needs to be your call as the player. This is a character that there's really nothing I can suggest. It really is going to have to be up to you to figure that out because you're the one who's going to be playing the character. If you are going to be playing the character, obviously. And then I just have any favorite food, drinks, substances. Again, he might be developing a drinking problem. Again, that's up to you. And again, going back to kind of the idea of South American sort of thing, I'm thinking that the High Elves Spanish French type food, and the Wood Elf more like Tex-Mex and Central South American type food, which I know is very diverse. I'm just saying, Tex-Mex as a, kind of an idea. It's a flaw. Everybody has flaws, and I think that good flaws for characters are ones that actively impede them to a degree. Everybody knows those. Oh, I'm a perfectionist. Well, it's a flaw to it, if it's taken too far, but it's a flaw that's not really a flaw, that sort of thing. I think he's the flaw that I thought fit him best, going back to all the other stuff, the psychological stuff. He's become very cynical, or overly cynical. He's become very untrusting and disinclined to make friends and really try to get to know people. And for a charisma-based character, that is a legitimate problem. That's a flaw. Oh, I accidentally skipped over something, but it's not that big a deal. I already went over that little section about his family and child, his prior life, and being a kind of just a regular guy. I already went over that stuff. I kept thinking that I was missing something, and I did go past that, but it's no biggie. Went over it in other ways. So the last little tidbit I have here is for the Dungeon Master. Things, I call it DM candy. These are just little things that you can put as possibilities for plot hooks and things for the Dungeon Master. It's up to them to use them or not. I think just having some little notes for things that a Dungeon Master might be able to play around with is not a bad thing. So the ones I have here, the plague, natural or intentional? The high elf leaders of the town, were they doing what they thought was right? Was it apathy? Was it racism? or were at least some of them actively trying to kill off the wood elves? The theft. He stole some stuff from some powerful people. They probably didn't like it. And one of the things that I forgot to bring up is that you'll have to work with your DM on all the stuff he stole. Like I said, also gonna be up to the DM whether there's gonna be anybody tracking him down, that sort of thing. So that's definitely a possible plot hook there. Family and friends. Again, I don't think, you know, oh, so and so actually survived. Not that sort of thing, but not all of his family. It was just his immediate family that died. There's probably other relatives around still in that community, and people that he used to be friends with that are still there. And whether his beliefs about how they felt towards him are true or not, it's entirely possible that over time any negative feelings towards him might fade, or again, they might have not really been there in the first place. But people in his community might start wondering where he went, what happened to him. And if he starts getting a reputation from adventuring, some of them might come seeking him out for whatever reason, but that's up to the dungeon master. Again, this is just what I call DM candy, little plot hook possibilities. So that is the character. Let's get to the build. So let's start with our ability scores, and I'm just going to put this in here right quick. Our point by ability scores to start with. So we've got Strength 8, Dump Stat, Dex 12, Con 14, Intelligence 12, Wisdom 11, Charisma 15. And because he's a wood elf and I'm going with the classic, or, well, the legacy, whatever you want to call it, wood elf stat bumps, he's going to end up with a Dex of 14 and a Wisdom of 12. So I think this is nice rounded out. He's got the highest he can get in Charisma, which is important. He's got some Dexterity to give him a little AC boost. He's got a decent Con score. And he's going to have a +1 in Intelligence and Wisdom skills. So he's going to, it's a good spread. And I've just got a whole list of things I'm going to be putting in here as needed. Okay, so to start with, his background is failed merchant. It seemed to fit the best. It's not necessarily that he's a failed merchant so much as he just gave up and left because of aforementioned issues. But that would seem to fit the best without having any extraneous stuff attached to it. With the rest of in the background, the trait that you get from your background fit the best. So Weaver's tools, obviously. There are no Tailor's tools. I would just include that in there. Talk to your DM if it's an issue. And for the skills, I put, you can choose whatever skills you think fit best. I just went with investigation, persuasion, and then halfling as a language because why not? Again, that's something that you can work into his background. Why does he speak halfling? Is there a large halfling community in the town that he's from, the city? Or a different language? When in his wandering, his travels over the last few months or couple of years, whatever, did he spend a bunch of time around halflings or goblins or whoever? I just went with halfling because it's, why not? Like I said. So that's background. Now we start getting into our actual levels. And level 1 is going to be Sorcerer. And let me go ahead and drop that down so you can read it properly. So, level 1, we're getting our sorcerer type right off the bat, of course, Aberrant Mind. Why did I go with Aberrant Mind? Why sorcerer? Why Aberrant Mind? Well, as I said, the inspiration struck me that he survived this illness, and I had to decide why. And the idea of someone whose magical abilities awakened because of this illness, and that allowed him to survive in some way, that was where I went with that. And then I looked at the subclasses, at least the ones I have available to me. I don't have all the books and all the stuff. I think I have pretty much all the subclasses that I've purchased through D&D Beyond, which is the tool I use. But all of them, I thought about it and I went with Aberrant Mind because I honestly can't say why, it just seemed to fit the best out of all of them. I thought Wild Magic at first because, he's had this wild magic develop within him, and that's what allowed him to survive. That would also be a perfectly acceptable choice. It's just that some tables don't like the wild magic sorcerer because of things that can happen with the wild magic tables. So I thought I would play it safe and go with something different, and I went with Aberrant Mind. And what you get out of that at level 1 is your psionic spells, your regular spell casting. You get telepathic speech, which is useful. And of course, proficiencies, I went with Insight and Deception. And in general, at level 1, you have a perfectly good sorcerer. He's going to have proficiency in Insight, Deception, Investigation, Persuasion. Languages would be Common, Elvish, and Halfling. He's got pretty well rounded out ability scores, so you have a pretty good start. I think I could go into the spells that I picked out, but I think I'd just leave the spells up to you because they don't matter as much. You can go with the theme of the psionic type spells and things like mental control and that sort of stuff if you want. Or you can go entirely utility and combat, whatever it is that strikes your fancy as far as the spells. Yes, the spells go. Spells go. And then, and of course, as a high charisma character, you've got your persuasion and deception, which are very helpful skills to have for a charisma based character. So our second level is going to be fighter. We're taking a level of fighter. And you might think, oh, why are you immediately multi-classing into fighter? We want the armor proficiencies. This is not a must. This is simply something that I think is good for this character. It makes sense because he would be paranoid about getting hurt, about getting sick again, but getting hurt in general. So, getting armor proficiencies, taking the defense fighting style to increase AC even further, and getting second wind is going to be helpful because this will allow him to wear medium armor, up to medium armor, and use a shield. And thanks to the defense fighting style, I believe wearing regular half plate with a shield, he would have an AC of, I think, 18, 17 or 18 or so. And then, of course, you can add the shield spell and get it up even higher. So, again, this is not something you absolutely have to do. You could go straight sorcerer if you want, or multi-class something else if you want to. After all, as I keep saying, once you're playing the character, it's your once you're playing this character, it's your character to play as you see fit. And what happens during the game should always have an impact on your choices when you level. But what this does is give you a sorcerer that has some tankiness to it. And again, that plays into what I think would be a character that would be kind of paranoid about his health. So from there, we're going to get up to level 3. All of our levels after that are going to be sorcerers levels. So let me try to get this. Okay, I that's on the wrong part. Sorry, I mistyped something. Yeah. Don't need that yet. So at level 3 he gets we get our meta magic, and I like subtle spell and quicken spell. You can take whichever ones you want. It's just that I think that those are the best ones to take to start with. Subtle spell allows you to cast spells without having to use any verbal or somatic components, which means a lot of spells it allows you to cast them with nothing. You can just do it. And quicken spell allows you to reduce the casting time of an action spell to a bonus action, which means that if you want to make him a bit more of a sword and sorcery type of literally type of character, you can get an attack in, or you can cast a cantrip, and or you could cast a bonus action. You could cast a cantrip as your bonus action and a regular spell as your action, or vice versa. I just think that those are the two best ones to take early on, but it's up to you. Everybody has their preferences. And now we get to level 4, which is where a lot of that other stuff should have been. Okay. Too much stuff. There we go. Now you should be able to see all of it. Super professional. Nah. Keep it casual. We're building characters. We're having fun here. So, level 4 sorcerer, we're going to take the Warcaster feat. Now, you could save this for later, but I think it's good to take it now. Advantage on con saves for concentration checks. If you're not going to be rocking any spells that use concentration checks, maybe not a huge thing, but that's not the main reason we're taking it. The main reason we're taking it is that, well, casting spells as an attack of opportunity is also good, but mainly we want that ability to use somatic spells require hand movements, is what that means, while carrying a shield and weapon. So that will allow him to both carry a shield, have armor, have a weapon, even if it's just a staff or something, and still cast spells. Very, very useful. Sorry about that. For the kind of tanky sorcerer that we're going for here, build-wise. Alright, at level 6 we get our next thing, and of course you're going to be getting your spell level ups all through out as a spellcaster. That's again, sorry. Good grief. Is this all visible? No. So let's go ahead and get that so you can see it all. So at level 6, we're going to be able to cast psi spells with sorcerer's points and get resistance to psychic damage. And we've already got advantage versus charmed as an elf, but we also get resistance or advantage against frightened, which isn't a bad thing. At level 8, we are going to get our next upgrade. We can it would be completely reasonable to go ahead and bump charisma up at this point, but since we left it at 15, I thought take a feat to bump it up the 1 point instead of 2. So I thought telekinetic. It fits the whole psionic theme. We get to put a point in one of the 3 mental ability scores, charisma obviously. And what we get out of it, we get our super mage hand and the ability to telekinetic shove. Both useful. And again, just raising up the charisma to 16 is going to improve all of our spell casting. At level 10, I'm not going to bother putting this in there because it's a very quickie. We get another meta magic. I went with transmuted spell. Again, you can take whichever ones you want. At level 12, I guess I don't really need to put that one in there either. Let's just go ahead and do this, since we're kind of winding this up. And a lot of these are pretty quick. Make sure everything is on screen. There we go. So yeah, at level 12, we're going to boost up our charisma by 2 points to 18. At level 14, we get the Aberrant Mind ability, Revelation in Flesh, which allows you to spend sorcery points to get special abilities for 10 minutes. At level 16, we could go ahead and bump charisma again, but I thought Metamagic Adept, because we get 2 more Metamagic abilities, and I went with Extended Spell and Heightened Spell. Again, you can do whatever you want. Again, you could go ahead and bump charisma at this point and then do something else later. You could take a completely different feat if you want. This is just kind of what I went with because I like putting the Metamagic Adept feat on a sorcerer so they get 2 more sorcery points and 2 more Metamagic abilities that they can use with all of their sorcery points. And of course, the 2 that you get for the ability, you're only supposed to be able to use for that ability, which is something you need to keep in mind. At level 17, we get another Metamagic ability. I went with Distant Spell. Again, take your pick. At level 18, we get Warping Implosion, which is a damaging teleport ability. And at level 19, we get our final charisma boost up to 20. And of course, you're going to have level 9 spells, spells all the way up to level 9. And you're going to have a very tanky, powerful sorcerer as far as mechanics go. It's a fairly straightforward build as far as the mechanics go. The focus of this particular series, as I said, is on the characters themselves, although some of them will have more complicated character builds or mechanics builds. It's just in this case, it didn't need to be a complicated build. The important part was the story of the character, and then the story that you will create with the character, of course. And I think that really wraps it up. That covers everything. And yeah, you can go ahead and take this character and make it your own. If you do play it in a campaign or a one shot, tell me about it. Tell me how it went. Do you like the character? Leave a comment. Let me know what you think. I know I don't have the best video etiquette necessarily, and I pause, and I don't like editing videos, so I don't edit all that stuff out. I would rather have the natural flow of someone talking than the blink and somebody has changed position slightly and you can tell that they've cut out little bits and pieces of the video, and I don't really care if there's little bits and pieces left in of ums and ahs and pauses and stuff, personally. So, yeah. So while I do understand that it's not for everybody, and of course if you have any constructive criticism, it's welcome. Won't necessarily listen to it, because it depends on me and the things that I prefer to do. I am the one making the videos after all. But, of course, mostly I would love to hear your feedback on the character itself. What does this spark in your imagination? And again, if you actually do take this character and use it, let me know. And I will finish off with all the other YouTube stuff of don't forget to subscribe if you want to be notified, and hit the bell so you are notified, because YouTube doesn't actually notify you properly unless you do both for some reason. So you're notified when I put up new videos. And like the video if you liked it, dislike it if you didn't. It's audience participation, interaction, either way. Share the video. There's options: Twitter, forums, whatever floats your boat, hits your fancy. Go ahead and it's very appreciated, though. I'm being a bit facetious here. It's very appreciated if you share the video. And of course, comments, the likes, dislikes, all of it, views, helps with the algorithms. Because that's how YouTube works now. It's all about them algorithms. So yeah, I think I've run out of things to ramble about. Thank you very much for watching. I am Mr. Acid. I will see you all in the next one. Bye.